Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the Marion Minor Cook Athenaeum. My name is Miriam Farah, and I'm one of your Athenaeum Fellows for the school year. Since its founding, the United States has led the genocide of Native Americans through massacres, forced displacement to reservations, and other acts of mass violence. Both federal and state governments sought to systematically deprive Native Americans of their political and economic rights through other means as well. Governments worked to systematically destroy indigenous cultures through forced assimilation in boarding schools and bans on indigenous languages, cultural, and religious practices. These practices of systemic racism have contributed to the low rates of Native Americans in higher education, as well as the high number of missing and murdered indigenous women every year. These are two of the many issues Native Americans experience daily as a result of this violent history. Tonight we have with us Dr. David Heska Wanbli Weiden, who will speak about these issues as a first-generation college student and an enrolled citizen of the Sicangu Lakota Nation. He will delve into the harmful criminal justice policies that impact Native Americans, especially women. Through readings from his work, Winter Counts, we will learn about his personal experiences as well as macro-level social and political issues. Dr. Weiden is an award-winning author who has written the novel Winter Counts, short stories, and nonfiction for various publications. And his work does not end there. He is also a series editor of Native Edge, an imprint of the University of New Mexico Press, focusing on indigenous literature. Currently, Dr. Weiden is a professor of Native American Studies and Political Science at the Metropolitan State University of Denver. He also teaches creative writing courses at other colleges in Denver. Before becoming a best-selling author and professor, Dr. Weiden earned his MFA from the Institute of American Indian Arts, his JD from the University of Denver College of Law, and his PhD from the University of Texas at Austin. Tonight, Dr. Weiden will be delivering the 2022-2023 Gould Center for Humanistic Studies Ricardo J. Cajones Lecture. Before getting started, I wanted to remind everyone of two quick things. One, wearing your mask indoors while not actively eating or drinking is highly encouraged by the college. And two, please take this time right now to silence and put away your cell phones. And please remember that both video and audio recording is strictly prohibited. Now please join me in welcoming Dr. Weiden.
Ampetu washte. Amachiapi David Heska Wanbli Weiden. Chante washte nape chiazupo casto. Good day. I'm David Heska Wanbli Weiden, and I greet you tonight with a good heart and a good hand. And I want to thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I want to thank CMC as well. I want to thank my friend, Shelley Blanton-Stroud, who is so kindly been just such a wonderful friend in so many ways. I want to thank Amy Kind for bringing me out here. I want to thank the Gould staff. I want to thank these wonderful students that I have met tonight, dinner and the seminar that I was with. Really, y'all are, you give me hope for the future. It is easy to become cynical, but I find engaged, smart, kind students like this, and it gives me hope. It's just a wonderful thing. So thank you so much. Wopila, thank you, Wopila. I want to start a little bit. I'm going to get into the heavy stuff in a minute, but I want to talk a little bit and just say that I have a deep appreciation for liberal arts colleges. I am the father of two sons, David and Sasha, and I have been hearing about the Claremont colleges for a long time. My roommate in graduate school went to the Claremont colleges, and I heard on a daily basis how wonderful they were. And I see now that, in fact, he was correct. So it's truly wonderful to experience this firsthand. And true story, my oldest son, David Jr., was going to apply to one of the Claremont colleges, but he, in fact, was lucky enough to be accepted to his early decision college, and so he's going to college out east. But we'll see about Sasha, who's age 15. So thank you again for having me. I'm going to do two things tonight. I want to talk a little bit about my journey as a first-generation low-income student, because I think it has relevance. We've got a lot of students in this room. We've got a lot of professors. We've got some administrators. And I think I want to talk a little bit about the importance of education for students of color and first-generation students. So I grew up in the roughest neighborhood in Denver, Colorado, called Swansea area. Our neighborhood was so bad, it has been determined in all of the United States to be the most polluted zip code in the entire country. In one zip code, we had a dog food factory, an oil refinery, an arsenic and cadmium refinery, and stockyards. Okay, this was a rough neighborhood. Neither of my parents went to college, and they were baffled by the entire thing. I, again, grew up in this very rough neighborhood, but I would spend summers on my reservation. The Rosebud Sioux tribe is how we pronounce our nation in English. In our language, it's the Sicangu Lakota Oyate, so the Sicangu people, Sicangu nation. And I would go to South Dakota, and I would spend summers there, where I never quite felt that I fit in because they thought that I was fabulously wealthy being from the city, which of course was hilarious because, you know, I grew up in quite grueling poverty. But the lesson here is that education allows for a first-generation college student like myself to be in front of a wonderful group like this tonight. It allows me to publish a book like this, which has been purchased by ABC, and we'll see whether or not they actually make it. I've had some great talks tonight about that. We'll see what happens. So it's education, and so I want to talk about how important it is to emphasize education and also to give support to first-generation students when they arrive in college. Now, my parents, although they did not go to college, they were voracious readers. And they passed on their love of literature to me. And so I grew up in a home full of library books and cheap paperbacks, and this instilled a love of literature that has served me well throughout my life. But they certainly couldn't assist me in the college application process. They didn't know anything about it. And they certainly couldn't help to prepare me for college. And I think this is a real flaw that we have in our system, is that first-generation students, they arrive at a fine institution like this or anywhere really, and they're just not ready often. And I think the more that we can do, both on an institutional level and on a personal level, helping, first-generation students fit in, helping them, I think is really the way to go. I did transfer out of my college that I went to because I simply wasn't ready. And I transferred back home to the University of Colorado at Boulder, where I did eventually finish, but really just out of pure stubbornness, okay? I was deeply unprepared for college, deeply unprepared. I went to the worst high school in the entire city of Denver. They're constantly trying to close it down. And I would just end this by saying that the more that we can help those students from challenging financial situations come to wonderful schools like this, the better it is for our entire society. So again, support your classmates, support the first generation students, okay? It's a good thing. Now, let me turn to the topic of tonight's speech. So I am the author of Winter Counts, and thank you so much again for the wonderful introduction. So it's my first novel. I have a children's book called Spotted Tail, and I have a book on the U.S. Supreme Court called Sorcerer's Apprentices. But the significance of this book is this is the first crime novel in 30 years to be published by what we call the Big Five Press, by a Native American author. So for 30 years, for 3 decades, no author of color has been able to crack what we call the Big Five. The Big Five in New York are the Big Five publishing companies: HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, Hachette, Macmillan, Penguin Random House. And there has been a real exclusionary trend for nearly 3 decades. Now, you had many, many people that would write about Native American issues that were not Native. Now, again, I like these books, but Tony Hillerman, he wrote quite extensively on Native American issues in his Leap, Horn, and She series of books. And look, I like them, and I know his daughter, Ann Hillerman, and I think he did it the right way. But it should not have taken 3 decades for a writer of color to finally get signed by one of the big 5 publishing houses. Now, the happy news here is that the book won 12 awards. It was nominated for 20, and it won 12 awards. It sold well. But there are now 10 Native writers that have signed contracts with the big houses. So I think that what we've shown here, my friend Tommy Orange had a similar success with his book, They're There. If you haven't read it, give it a shot. It's fantastic. I see heads nodding, or a head nodding. Two, at least 2. Okay, right on. And what I'm saying is, it just takes, the first bit of success, and then the publishing houses will see that, yes, people do want to hear about Native American issues. They do want to read about lives that are different than their own. And it should not have taken this long. Now, the other thing that I'm quite proud of in this book here is that the Winter Counts has sparked a national dialogue about some of the issues that I'll speak about here in a moment. So in a moment, I'm going to describe the truly unjust laws that have been passed by the US government that affect Native Americans on reservations. And I'm going to talk about those in some detail. And the thing is, though, people don't know that these laws exist. A Native American woman, if she lives on a reservation, has an 8 in 10 chance of being raped during the course of her lifetime. Native American women are now vanishing across reservations because of this phenomena that has been called missing and murdered Indigenous women. It is a true outrage, and yet people don't understand that there are laws passed by the United States government that are facilitating this. And I am thrilled to share with you that since this book was published 2 years ago, I've heard from US attorneys who have said, Dave got it exactly right. I've heard from 3 congressional staffers who work for congresspeople, and they've said, we didn't know. And we are talking to our representative about sponsoring an amendment to the Tribal Law and Order Act to try and get more funding. And I even had the dean of the South Dakota Law School recently wrote a law review article analyzing the legal issues in the book and saying, Weiden got it right, and we need an overhaul of criminal justice laws in the United States. So I'm deeply, deeply gratified. Look, I'm a writer, okay? I want to write a book that you stay up all night reading. It's like, I can't wait. I just got a quote the other night on Twitter. Somebody said she was listening to the book on audio, and she was listening to an audio book of Winter Counts, and she was so entranced by it that she ruined 2 batches of cookies. Well, that's what I want to hear, okay? I want to tell a story. We're storytellers. Writers are storytellers, okay? But at the same time, I believe in the educational and transformative power of fiction. I believe in the power of fiction to open our minds to other experiences. And I believe that we can use fiction to increase and make social justice issues more prominent in our society. So with that, let me read a little bit, and then we're going to talk. I'm just going to read a very, very short passage here. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the laws so that you know in some detail. But let me read just a page and a half of Winter Counts. Now, if you don't know about Winter Counts, the Winter Counts is the story of Virgil Wounded Horse. Virgil Wounded Horse is a hired vigilante on the Rosebud Reservation, which is where I'm from. Now, you might be saying, well, hired vigilante, what does that mean? A private enforcer, hired vigilante, what is that, Dave? What does that mean? Well, I'll explain in a moment why this is necessary, but I'll just briefly tell you now, the US government is refusing to prosecute felony crimes that occur on the reservation. 40% of all felony crimes are going unpunished. So child abusers, rapists, murderers, they're apprehended and they are being set free to go commit more crimes. This is a true outrage. And I'm going to give you some numbers in just a moment. So what is happening is private avengers are springing up on reservations. If you can't get justice from the US government, you might hire somebody like my guy, Virgil Wounded Horse. Here's what he charges. He'll go put a beat down on somebody that hurts your child or your wife or your sister or your mother. Here's what he charges: $100 for each tooth he knocks out and $100 for each bone he breaks. Now, the question I usually get is, do these vigilantes actually exist? And the answer is yes, they do exist. Now, they're not easy to find. They don't have websites. You can't go to the website and say, I want to book a beating at 3:30 p.m. on Friday. Okay, that doesn't happen. You have to know them. But I can assure you that they exist. And the fact that they exist is a true indictment of the criminal justice system on reservations. So in this passage, we are in the head of Virgil Wounded Horse, the Avenger. Now, the other thing that you need to know to understand this passage, I'm going to skip around a little bit in the book. I'm going to mess with the timeline here. I was going to read another passage, but I've chosen not to. I was going to read, we've already been talking about this. I was going to read an unpublished piece of mine. My son is a school shooting survivor. My youngest son, Sasha, was in STEM School Highlands Ranch when 2 gunmen came in and started shooting and killing. And this was obviously every parent's worst nightmare. It happened in May 2019. You can look it up. It's the STEM School Highlands Ranch shooting. I was going to read a piece that I wrote about that and what it is to be a parent when your son is inside of a school. And I wrote the piece because the violence that has been visited upon Native peoples for years seems to follow us often, not just me, but all Native people. And the fact that my son, once again, had to hide in a closet and hear gunshots go off and not know when that door opened if it was the killer or the police, that's an outrage. It's a problem we have in this society. And I was going to read that. In light of current events I have chosen that have happened in this state, I do not feel it's proper to read it tonight. I feel it's too close and too soon. So I talked it over with the wonderful students in the seminar today, and I think we kind of agreed that it doesn't feel right now. So I'm not going to read that. I'm going to read a piece from Winter Counts. Virgil is also the legal guardian of his 14-year-old nephew. Virgil's sister, Sybil, died in a car accident. And so Virgil became the legal guardian of his 14-year-old nephew, Nathan. Now, Virgil is in a hospital. Nathan's been hurt. And he's musing about the nature of having your child in a hospital bed. So here is just a page and a half from Winter Counts. Hours passed while I waited for Nathan to wake up. I tried to stop my mind from going to dark places, but image of my nephew as brain damage crowded into my head. I was proud of him, his intelligence and his curiosity, and his fierce defense of music I hated. It was breaking my heart and spirit to imagine that these parts of him might be gone for good. And then I started to obsess over things Nathan had done that might have tipped me off to hard drug use. Had he been acting strangely? Maybe I should have searched his backpack and phone. I gave up trying to stop this parade of images, and I just sat with my fear and guilt. The window in the hospital room was murky, like it hadn't been washed in years, but I could still glimpse the russet hills and rolling prairie of the reservation outside in the dying light. Back in the time before Columbus, there were only Indians here, no skyscrapers, no automobiles, no streets. Of course, we didn't use the words Indian or Native American back then. We were just people. We didn't know we were supposedly drunks or lazy or savages. I wondered what it was like to live without that weight on your shoulders, the weight of the murdered ancestors, the stolen land, the abused children, the burden every Native person carries. We were told in movies and books that Indians had a sacred relationship with the land, that we worshiped and nurtured it. But staring at Nathan, I didn't feel any mystical bond with the res. I hated our shitty, unpaved roads and our falling down houses and the snarling packs of dogs that roamed freely in the streets and alleys. But most of all, I hated that kids like Nathan, good kids, decent kids, got involved with drugs and crime and gangs because there was nothing for them to do here. no after-school jobs, no clubs, no tennis lessons. Every month in the Lakota Times newspaper, there was an obituary for another teen suicide, another family in the Burn Thigh Nation who'd had their heart taken away from them. In the old days, the Ayapaha was the town crier, the person who would meet incoming warriors after a battle, ask them what happened so that they wouldn't have to speak of their own glories, and then tell the people the news. But now, the Ayapaha was our local newspaper, and they announced losses and harms too often, victories and triumphs too rarely. Why didn't I leave? People here always talked about going to Rapid City or Sioux Falls or Denver, getting a job and making a clean break, putting aside native ways and assimilating, adapting to suburban life. But I thought about the sound of the drummers at a powwow, the smell of wild sage, the way little native kids looked dressed up in their first regalia, the flash of the sun coming up over the hills. I wondered if I could ever really leave the reservation, because the res was in my mind, a virtual res, one that I was seemingly stuck with. And then I fell into a half-sleep, immersed in fugue dreams and transient thoughts, images of Indian children dancing in my head. Thank you. In that passage, which gets quoted a lot in newspapers and such, that's Virgil thinking about the reservation. And I get this question a lot. It's like, Dave, if things are so tough on the res, why don't people leave? And then I often get a question from people that are a little more bold. They're like, well, I have heard that natives are quite wealthy, Native Americans, okay, because of all the casino money that you have, okay? So can you tell us about that casino money, huh? How about that, huh? Rich Indian, you know? And so, no, I'm serious. I mean, depending if they've had a couple of drinks or something, you know, I get this. And so I'm going to talk a little bit right now about the economics of Native Americans, because there are a lot of misconceptions out there about American Indians and our finances, okay? First of all, we don't get free tuition for college. How I wish this were true, okay, as I am staring at an $85,000 tuition bill. So I truly wish that it were true, and if anybody out there can make it happen, please give me a call. I happily work with you. But the second thing that I want to talk about is that natives are not wealthy because of casinos. All right, and if you've, you know, it's a really cool show, Rutherford Falls. It just got canceled, sorry to say. You know, but it does take place, it took place, past tense, on a Native American casino. And yeah, you would think that, hey, yeah, they have some money. Now, here's the reality of it. There are about 3 Native American casinos that make some serious money. Shakopees and some of the folks in Connecticut, they had the good luck for their reservation to be located near a major city. So they built a casino, and they're getting 1 million people a year. Now, my nation does have a casino, the Rosebud Casino. The closest population center to our casino is Valentine, Nebraska, population 2,000. Okay, so we barely break even, and that is the case for most Native Americans. So we don't get casino money, okay? Now, the handful of tribes that do have these wealthy casinos, well, they're doing great. They get what's called a per capita payment of about $50,000 to $75,000 a month. Nice, you know, again, adopt me, you know, I'm ready to join up, you know, but it doesn't work that way. Let me give you now the reality of how Native Americans live today. Let's just go over, okay? The unemployment rate on reservations is 50 to 85%. 50 to 85%. On my reservation, it's 85%. Now, process that for a moment. In the Great Depression, what was the unemployment rate? Was it like 25%, I believe? And like people were throwing themselves off of buildings and such, you know? I mean, it was a collapse of the economic system at the time. Our unemployment rate is 3 times that. Okay, there simply aren't jobs on our reservation. Now, many of you are thinking, well, why aren't there jobs, Dave? Why don't they? They're just lazy, Well, it's a very, very complicated thing that I don't want to get into tonight, but let me explain. We're not allowed to own our land on reservations. I own 3 pieces of land on my reservation that I've inherited from my family. Those 3 pieces of land are held in trust by the federal government. They are leased out to several white ranchers. So people think it's all natives on reservations. No, no, no. Because of a law called the General Allotment Act, reservations were carved up into like a checkers or chessboard with 160-acre parcels. And so natives were allowed to lease the land, but any that was left over, Europeans were allowed to come in and own the land. So in fact, they shoved us off to these tiny parcels of land called reservations, and then they came in and divided it up further. So you will see on most reservations like really fancy houses. And you're like, see, I told you those natives are rich. No, no, no. Those are the white ranchers that had the foresight to come in and gobble up the land. So my 3 pieces of land, I'm not allowed to visit it. I'm not allowed to step foot on my land. I can't build on it. I can't sell it. Okay, it's held in trust. I do get rent. I get rent from the ranchers. So twice a year, I get a check from the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. My last check for my 3 parcels of land was $1.67. So you can see those will really add up over time, right? I mean, you wait 5 or 10 years, and I'm saying a trip to McDonald's is happening, okay? And not just the value meal either. You can probably get the full meal deal, okay? Maybe even supersize it if they still do that, right? So, kidding aside, this is an absolute abomination. The fact that we are not allowed to own our land, I was explaining to the seminar today, one of the first decisions of the United States Supreme Court regarding Native Americans was Johnson versus McIntosh. Johnson versus McIntosh, by the US Supreme Court, Justice John Marshall, said that Native Americans have no right to own land in the United States. They have the right to occupy, but not the right to own land. That's still good law. Johnson versus McIntosh has never been overturned. So we only have such rights to own land as the federal government chooses to give to us. I do own my house in Denver. That's because we're in a land-based system where I'm allowed to do that. On the res, I cannot buy a house and own it. Okay, it's not allowed. So because we can't own property, it's exceptionally hard on the reservation to start a business. So if you can't start a business there, if you can't own land or charge rent or get a loan from the bank for a business, you can see why there aren't any jobs. So unemployment rate on reservations, 50 to 85%. Percentage of families living at or below the poverty line, 42%. Poverty line, that's really bottom of the barrel. And here's one that's really shocking. Percentage of housing on Native American reservations that is substandard. How does the federal government define substandard housing? One or both of 2 conditions. No electricity, no running water, or both. 40%. 40% of houses on Native American reservations do not have running water, electricity, or both. 3 weeks ago on my reservation, they found a 70-year-old man frozen to death in his house. The snowstorm we had was terrible up there. We got it in Denver, and then it turned north and really hit South Dakota. Houses on the reservation do not have natural gas, or how do you heat here? Is it natural gas here? Does anybody know? Okay, I'm seeing heads nodding. It doesn't exist on the reservation. It's either firewood, or if you can afford it, a tank of propane. Now, a tank of propane used to be $65, but it's going up, and now it's like $125, $150. So if you can't afford that, you have to do without. And the gentleman couldn't afford it, and so they found him frozen to death. This just happened. Sadly, I wish this was an aberration. It is not. There are people on our reservation that die every year because they can't afford the heating bill, or they can't get food, or they can't afford medicine. So this is the reality, okay? Casino money doesn't exist. The reality is, in a country as wealthy and as abundant as we have in the United States of America, we allow these terrible substandard conditions to exist. And it is a true disgrace. And part of why I write these books is I want to open the eyes of people that don't understand this. Okay, I want people to understand. Because I know that folks are not going to go read my academic articles, you know. Look, I don't even want to read my own academic articles, okay? You know, there are a lot of things I'd rather do before reading some of my academic journal articles. No offense to my professor friends out here, okay? You know, they're important work that needs to be done. But maybe I will read a book, and maybe others will read a book like this, and maybe you'll have fun reading it, but maybe you're going to learn as well that Native Americans don't have housing, don't have heat in our housing, don't have running water. You know, it's a true disgrace. Let me turn now to the topic of this talk tonight, and that is criminal justice issues on the reservation. Now, we could go on and on about a lot of the issues that are unfair and inequitable on reservations, but I don't want this to be just a travelogue, you know, or a laundry list of grievances that we natives have, okay? But I do believe that criminal justice issues are something, it's an issue that's fixable, okay? Some things, you know, they're structural. Okay, how we're going to get more businesses on the res, that's something that we can't fix easily. But I would suggest to you that, and especially you young leaders of America here, that these issues are eminently fixable. They can be solved if there's an awareness and a will to do it. And so that's why I'm honored tonight to tell you a little bit about some of the laws passed by the US government and how they are contributing to the phenomenon of missing and murdered Indigenous women. So, criminal justice issues on reservations. We have two major problems: the under-prosecution of felony crimes and the mass incarceration of Native Americans. So these are two different but related issues. Now let me start first with the under-prosecution of felony crimes. Now I don't think I need to explain to this educated crowd the difference between a felony and a misdemeanor crime, right? So a misdemeanor, okay, some of you are like, yeah, you kind of do, Dave. Okay, all right. A misdemeanor crime is any crime that is punishable by less than a year in jail, okay? So it's a minor crime, okay? Shoplifting, noise violations, whatever. It's, you know, it's typically not a violent, serious crime, okay? A felony crime is a crime that is punishable by 1 year or more in jail or prison. Your rape, murder, arson, you know, your serious crimes, okay? So the law treats misdemeanors and felony crimes differently, all right? And that also is true on Native American reservations. Let me now introduce the Major Crimes Act to you, the law that is responsible for more misery on Native American reservations than almost any other. The Major Crimes Act was passed in the mid-1800s, 1885. The Major Crimes Act takes away the right of independent sovereign Native nations to prosecute felony crimes on our own lands. Let me unpack that. Native American nations are sovereign, independent entities. If you don't know, there are 577 Native nations within the boundaries of the United States. Now, I say nations consciously and purposely, not tribes. Okay, nations. Because we're independent nations within the boundaries of the US. The Constitution, the Declaration are clear on this, okay? So we natives have a different status than other groups. We're both an ethnic minority, but also we have a political status as well as citizens of our own nations, which makes us different than other groups in American society, because we have a political status as well. Now, a sovereign nation has the right to pass laws for its own citizens. If we travel to France, we have to follow the laws of France. We can't be over there like, well, I'm American, so I don't have to deal with your froggy laws, you know. I was just in France. I actually loved it. I had never been, and I went to a festival there, and I was saying to my girlfriend, this is fantastic. We need to move here. You know, how much does it cost to live here? You know, I just had never been. I was like really intimidated because I don't speak French. But it was, you know, it was really easy to get around. I loved it. So anyway, I don't mean to insult the French. I truly loved it. But if you go to France, you don't bring your own laws with you. The minute you step foot on French soil, you are subject to their laws, okay? This is how law works. except on Native American reservations. On Native American reservations, Native nations are not given the right to pass their own criminal laws. That right has been taken away from us because of the Major Crimes Act passed by the US Congress. This is a terrible violation of our independence and sovereignty. So that's bad enough, okay? That's bad enough right there. But here's the thing. Let me explain to you how this works. If there is a felony crime that occurs on a Native reservation, a murder, maybe somebody, God forbid, physically abuses a little girl or a little boy. God forbid that horrendous crime should ever happen, but it does happen. Or a woman is raped, or a man is murdered, or an arson is committed. If a felony crime is committed, tribal cops can even catch the offender. They can have him or her in custody, locked up in the tribal jail. But we are then required to call the FBI and the US Attorney's Office. We have to call them in. They come in, and they then decide whether they are going to continue with the case, whether they're going to prosecute the case or let the offender go free. So on our sovereign land, the FBI has the right to decide whether or not to prosecute these crimes. Now, okay, that kind of sucks, right? But here's the thing. The FBI and the US Attorney's offices are declining to prosecute about 40% of all felony crimes, meaning that child abusers, rapists, murderers are set free. They're set free to go out and commit more crimes. Now, if you think I'm making this up, let me give you some numbers that come from the US government itself. All right? Just about 5 years ago, there were 755 murder cases referred to the federal government by tribal police. 375 were declined. So the federal government declined to prosecute just under half of those. These crimes are murder. So it's like, sorry, you're free to go. There were 2,190 adult sex crimes referred. 1,675 were declined. That is a 76.5 declination rate. So they only prosecuted about 23.5% of these sexual abusers. Most horrifying, there were 619 child sex assaults referred. 446 were declined. That is a 72% declination rate. Now, the numbers, I'm sad to tell you, are actually understating the problem. For reasons that I need not get into here, the actual declination rates, the actual rates are actually much worse. But even if we take these numbers at face value, and these are the FBI's own numbers, it's an outrage, okay? So 72% of child abusers are being set free, right? 76% of rapists are being set free. 50% of murderers are being set free. This is outrageous. It's stunning. And I'd wager that unless you read my book, or you teach Native American studies, I doubt anybody in this room knew this. Imagine that this happened in Claremont, California, right? That 76% of child abusers are being set free. There would be marches in the streets, right? It's outrageous that this is being allowed to happen. So that's problem one. Now, I know I'm going to get some questions, and I'll save some time here for questions here. But let me anticipate one of those questions right now. I'm sure some of you are saying, why? Why, Dave? Why is the federal government refusing to do its duty? Well, there are a number of reasons why, okay, why the US government won't prosecute these cases. First of all, the FBI is underfunded in Native American lands, in Indian country. On my reservation in the state of South Dakota, and there are 4 reservations in South Dakota of Lakota people, there are 2 FBI agents. That'd be 2. Now, my reservation alone is the size of Delaware, and we have about 20,000 people living there. And there are only 2 FBI agents to handle all of the cases that occur in South Dakota, and they are based in Pierre, up north. So these 2 FBI agents can barely keep up. They have to sort of triage, if you will. They have to choose which cases are most important. And so, or which can we get an easy conviction on. And so they have to make these tough decisions and let, well, that sucks that a kid got raped, but we've got a murder case over here. We've got a drug ring over here. And so they're going to prosecute those first. So there's your simple fix right there, okay? Let's adequately fund law enforcement on Native American reservations so that murderers and rapists are caught and sent to prison. I think that's a pretty easy fix. It just means taking some of the immense wealth of this country and giving it to law enforcement officials. And it seems to me this would be a bipartisan issue. I can't imagine there is a pro-child abuse contingent out there. It's like, no, we don't need to do that. I hope there's not anyway. Now part of it too, I don't want to get too deeply in the weeds here, but I've interviewed some of these FBI agents and such, and none of the FBI agents want to be in South Dakota, okay? They want a good assignment, all right? So here's another problem. It's sort of a institutional problem. The FBI agents are cycled in and out. They spend 2 years in South Dakota, and then they go off to a better assignment. So every 2 years, you have a new FBI agent coming in. So you've got a new rookie agent. He or she has to learn the culture. He or she has to figure out how to speak to Lakota people, how to gain their trust. By the time they have finally learned and gained their trust, they're off to beautiful Claremont, California, or LA, which I can't blame them. This is a gorgeous part of the country. I have to say, your mountains and your palm trees, it's gorgeous here, So, you can't blame them. But there may be financial incentives. Or how about this? How about 5-year hitches? Maybe 10-year hitches? I don't know. So these are, I'm happy to speak more about this, but I want to get on to other issues here. But this seems to me to be eminently solvable if we can just get some folks in the Congress to allocate the resources that are necessary. So let me leave it there, all right? So again, I'll just say one more thing. It's open season for raping women on reservations. You have people, this came up in the seminar that I spoke to earlier today. You have non-Native, usually men, that are traveling to Native reservations for raping women or sex trafficking because they know that it's highly unlikely they're going to get caught. On my reservation, again, the size of Delaware, we have 8 police agents on the streets at any one time. 8, okay? And you've got 2 FBI agents in the entire state. So they know it's unlikely they're going to get caught. And if they do get caught, they likely won't be prosecuted. And if they are prosecuted, they're probably going to be let off, okay? And now I see some looks out there. It's like, no, Dave, I'm pretty sure they would prosecute them. Let me tell you, this is in my book. If you'd read Winter Counts, this is a slight diversion. But people ask why we don't leave the reservation. This actually happened I've got it in the book, but it really happened. I want to show you the attitude in South Dakota, the racism that exists there. So on the Pine Ridge Reservation, that's the Oglala Lakota right next to ours, they had a group of about 25 middle school students that had gotten all A's, and they were so excited. And so they treated these little kids to a special trip to Rapid City, South Dakota to see a minor league hockey game. Wonderful, wonderful. These little kids get to go to a hockey game. So the kids are there, they're like, oh, this is so exciting, and so they're watching hockey. Some of them had never left the reservation. Like going to Rapid City was like a big deal for them. And on the deck above them is a group of 5 men, 5 drunken white men. And they see these little Native kids having the time of their lives, and they take their beers, and they pour the beers all over these Native kids' heads. They poured the beer and laughed at them and humiliated them, and the kids had to leave the game in shame. This actually happened. Now, they caught the men that did it, okay? They caught the men that poured the beer on their head, and they charged one with disorderly conduct, which seems a little light to me, but okay. He contests it. He goes to trial. I'm sure you can see where this is going. He was found not guilty by the jury in South Dakota. So what's the lesson there? The lesson is you can pour beer on little Native kids' heads, and no jury is going to convict you if you harm a Native child or a Native person. Okay, that's a real thing that happened. I get asked about this. I put it in the book, and people say, did that really happen? I can't believe it. Yes, it really happened. This is why we don't leave the reservation, and this is why it's open season on women, because juries are reluctant to prosecute anybody, when the victim is Native. All right, let me talk about, I'm starting to run out of time here. I go on and on, sorry. Let me talk about one more criminal justice issue, and then I'll read one more passage. Now, the second problem we have for Native American criminal justice issues is the over-incarceration for certain lesser offenses, or mass incarceration of Native Americans. Okay, now this is related. Let me give you some numbers. Native Americans are disproportionately likely to be incarcerated in federal prison, not state prison, federal prison. Okay, largely because of the Major Crimes Act. The Major Crimes Act is a federal law. So if you commit a felony or even a major misdemeanor on Native land, you're not tried in state court, you're tried in federal court. So everybody know you've got two layers of courts in the US, federal courts and state courts, okay? So the Bureau of Justice Statistics reports that Native Americans are 38% more likely to be incarcerated than the national average. So in fact, Natives are more likely to be in prison than any other ethnic group and much more likely to be killed by a police shooting. I know that may seem crazy because we have lots of, cases, again, national attention, but Natives get shot all the time on reservation. It just doesn't make the national news. On my reservation, we actually have a wall. It's on the street, and there are about 20 people that have been killed in police shootings. But not a one of them has ever hit the national news, but they have giant murals of them. Now, here's the thing, okay? In nearly every category, Native Americans are treated more harshly in the justice system. Now, we've already established that for certain felony crimes, there's an under-prosecution. But here's the thing, for certain crimes, there's an over-prosecution. Now, I know that seems paradoxical, but stick with me for a minute here, okay? Now, say we have an assault case, all right? So let's say that there's a bar fight, okay? Somebody goes to the bar on the reservation. My reservation is not dry. We have alcohol. And say there's a bar fight. This happens, people argue about sports or something, okay? And police come in and they call the FBI, and the FBI is like, this is a slam dunk. I can easily get a quick prosecution for an assault case, an assault and battery case. Now here's the thing. In state courts, the penalty for a simple assault or even an aggravated assault is going to be 6 months to a year, something like that. Is that about right? I know we've got a criminal lawyer right here. So, depending on the state and the jurisdiction and the laws. But in the federal system, okay, it's going to be much harsher because in the federal system you have something called the federal sentencing guidelines. I don't want to bore everybody here, but I think it's safe to say that in general, federal courts are far more punitive than state courts, and it results in longer prison terms for convicted offenders. In most cases, federal judges are required to apply the federal sentencing guidelines, and there usually is not parole in federal prison, okay? So let me break this down to an example. In state court, you've got a bar fight. You might do 6 months and maybe get out after 3. The same crime occurring on a Native reservation is going to be prosecuted in federal court, and that's going to be a 5-year term, and you're going to serve all of it. So you see, Natives, when they are prosecuted, tend to serve longer prison terms. Then when they come back to the reservation, you can't get a job working for the tribe if you have any sort of a federal conviction. So it's really problematic. So I could say much more about this, but let me just say this. You have under prosecution for certain crimes and over prosecution for lesser crimes that result in longer prison sentences. So it's a true mess, okay? And we haven't even gotten into the juvenile justice system yet. Juvenile justice system, which I don't have time to talk about tonight, for Native kids, they get thrown into the general population for federal prisons. Okay, so imagine a 16-year-old kid getting thrown into Gen Pop, okay? That's, you can imagine, that's an outrage. All right, I know that I want to leave some time for, I was going to talk about Native American spirituality, but I do want to get to a reading here. I'll just say this, if you don't know, Native American spirituality was criminalized by the US government. So our religion was made a felony crime until the year 1978. 1978, we were not allowed to practice our religion. So I'll just leave that out there. You can research that. on your own. Now I'm going to read a piece here, which Shelley, I think you've now had to suffer through this twice. Let me set this one up for you. This is a tough one to read, so excuse me, my allergies. All right, here we've got Virgil checking on his nephew Nathan after a night at a powwow. So we've got Virgil, Wounded Horse. He's been at a sweat lodge, and he's checking on his nephew. So we're in Virgil's head. So here is my final reading for the night. Here is a couple of pages from Winter Counts. I'd had enough for the night, so I went to go check on Nathan. I could see that his lights were on, so I'd turn everything off and I'd cover him with a blanket. I opened the door and I saw that he was passed out on his bed, all of his clothes still on, one arm hanging down at his side. "Dude, why don't you get into your shorts and get under the covers?" He didn't respond. "Nathan, let's go to bed. I'm tired." Still no response. "Nathan?" I looked at him closely. His face and lips were gray, almost blue. I saw an empty balloon, a lighter, and some crumpled, burned foil on the floor. There was an acrid vinegar odor in the air. Oh no. "Nathan, wake up, get up." I tried to sit him up, but he was too heavy and he fell back onto the bed. I pulled his eyelids up. His pupils were tiny and dark, like miniature black holes, and his skin felt cold and clammy. I slapped his face hard. "Nathan, open your eyes, wake up." No response, but I saw his chin move just a little. I ran to the living room for my cell phone. The IHS hospital was 50 miles from here, and the tribal police station about 20. The tribal cops were my only hope. My hands shaking, I dialed the number. "Police. This is Virgil Wounded Horse. My nephew, he's overdosing. He won't wake up. You need to send, what is your address?" "Please hurry, he's unconscious. I need your address, sir." He sounded pissed off, like I was stopping him from going home after a long shift. 83 in Spidergrass Road. Please, we're the only house out here. Just stay on the phone with me, all right? Is he breathing? I think so, yeah, but not much. Just stay on the phone. Stay on the phone, all right? Just hurry. How old is he? I don't know. He's only 14. I flashed back to Nathan as a little kid, playing with some toy cars I'd given him. What difference did it make how old he was if he was overdosing? How long has he been down? I don't know. I just found him. You have a car free. The dispatcher sounded angry again. We're on the way. You said it was an overdose? Heroin, I think. There was a balloon and some foil on the floor. Do you know how much of the drug he took? How the fuck should I know? I didn't know he was doing that shit. Just trying to help. How much does he weigh? I don't, maybe 140? We'll be there soon. Just stay with me, okay? Can you stay on the line? Sir? I let the phone drop to the floor. Black clouds entered the room, taking up all of the oxygen, all of the air. I couldn't breathe, so I let the darkness envelop my lungs, my skin, my body. Sir? Sir? I heard the voice on the phone from far away. Are you still there, sir? I picked up the phone. Yeah, I'm here. How close are they? Do you know how to do CPR, he asked. Kind of, like mouth-to-mouth resuscitation? Not exactly. I need you to start chest compressions right away. You remember that movie, Saturday Night Fever? Movie? What are you talking about? I need you to put both hands on his chest, right on top of his heart, and press down hard. Do 100 compressions a minute. Think of the disco beat from that song, Stayin' Alive. The song from the movie. Use that beat on his chest. Put the phone down and do it now. Keep doing it until they get there. I pulled up Nathan's sweatshirt. His skin wasn't brown anymore. It was a strange shade of gray and weirdly cold and damp. I clasped my hands together like I was praying, and I put them right over his heart. I'd always hated disco music, but my mother had played that old Bee Gees album constantly when I was a kid. I couldn't remember the lyrics, but the beat of the song came back to me instantly. I pushed down on Nathan's chest steadily, like I was dancing at a 49 party. Was I pressing too hard? Did I need to push harder? I focused on the beat of the music as I forced his heart to pump blood through his veins. And as I pushed, I tried to remember the Indian prayers my mother used to say to me. I'd heard them so many times as a kid. It seemed urgent that I remembered just one line, but nothing would come. How was it that I could remember some shitty disco song from years ago, but I couldn't remember my mother's own words? The weight of my failures, all of them, felt like a shroud wrapped around me. And as my nephew lay dying in the little house, I sent my words up to the Creator. Please don't let this child die. I will do anything. Just spare him. Spare him. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That is always a tough one to read, and thank you so much, and I am happy to take some questions about anything here. Oh, we've got microphones right on.
Thank you again.
Oh.
Dr. Weiden, for that really insightful talk and for your readings. Now we'll be taking questions, so please line up at one of these two microphones, and when you come up, please introduce yourself. Say your name, your year, and then ask your question. Thank you.
And feel free to ask anything, really. Sure, go ahead.
Hi,
Hi there.
my name is Lauren. I'm currently a senior here, and my mom is an elementary school teacher in Big Lake, Alaska, where her class is primarily Native Alaskan students, and many of them bring in experiences similar to the crimes that you had mentioned today. So I was wondering, how could our educational systems in the U.S. be more conducive to restoring justice for indigenous nations?
That is thank you. Lauren?
Yeah.
Lauren, thank you so much for that wonderful question. You know, I get asked this a lot. How can we teach Native history better? And I think that's a wonderful question. It's a wonderful, query, because I teach Native American Studies at my college, and my students are stunned about several issues. They're always stunned about the fact that Native spirituality was criminalized, until 1978. They're like, Dave, what about the First Amendment? Don't we have a Constitution? Well, yes, but the Constitution is not always applied to Native American citizens. The other thing that they are often stunned about is the boarding schools. If you don't know, about 70% of all Native students were taken by force away from their parents and shipped off either to these boarding schools far away. My own grandmother was taken to the Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania, or they are given to childless couples that just want a Native baby. And so for almost 100 years, Native kids were sent off to these boarding schools, and this is not taught in our curriculum, and that's an outrage. I've read some of these textbooks that they use. My own kid, so Sasha, my youngest one, he came to me when he was like in, second grade or something. He's like, Dad, we learned about Columbus. And Columbus, he really liked natives, In fact, he took some natives back to Europe with him, right? So he liked them, right? Well, yeah, he took them back as slaves, And so I was in a really tough spot here because his teacher was clearly telling him a certain version of American history that is demonstrably false. But what do you do, And I think that what we can do is we can ask for, look, I'm not saying we need to teach critical race theory in schools, although is that such a terrible thing? But okay, I guess that's controversial in some ways. But how about this? How about at least not leaving out certain parts of the story, such as the boarding schools, or such as the fact that there were nearly 600 treaties passed between the U.S. government and Native nations, and every single one of them was broken by the U.S. government. Maybe we could just tell that story more accurately. It doesn't need to be all told, but some degree of it, so that in college we don't have to play catch-up. So, the problem here is the mood in America right now in certain states is not geared towards a more comprehensive view of American history. Let's put it that way. So thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Will Ellsworth, and I'm a junior at CMC studying psychology and public policy. And so with the under prosecution of felonies, the policy that you proposed would be additional funding for the FBI and for U.S. attorneys to investigate that. I was wondering why you support that policy versus having Native law enforcement, local law enforcement getting to be able to make those charging decisions, and then otherwise, you could have U.S. attorneys who are part of the Native community and courts built in. So, I just am kind of wondering why you think that funding the FBI is better than doing it within the community.
Again, wonderful questions, but I'm not surprised given the caliber of students here. Look, I cover this a lot in my Native American Studies classes, all right? I believe that we need to look at the possible. And what is that saying? The perfect is the enemy of the good. Yes, I would love to see all criminal justice authority returned back to Native American nations. That's not going to happen. Just like Johnson versus McIntosh, the case that I told you about that said natives can't own property. Look, if we overturn Johnson versus McIntosh and say that that was wrongfully decided, the entire North American continent goes back to natives. And we'd be okay with that. Sorry, guys, but that ship has sailed. That's not going to happen, okay? We're not going to send you all back to Europe, wherever you come from. That's not going to happen, And so Johnson versus McIntosh, it exists, and I don't think that they are going to return full criminal justice authority to Native nations. So I'm saying focus on the possible. Having said that, if we can make that happen, I'm down with that. So great question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Theo. I'm a junior here at CMC. Thank you so much for your talk today.
Thank you.
I'm curious, given imperfections in the existing criminal justice system in the United States, even if criminal justice were to be returned to Native nations, do you envision sort of traditional policing or alternatives to policing within those nations?
Another great thought. I don't envision traditional policing, but I do envision a different sort of court system. So there's a movement among certain Native nations for what are called wellness courts. So Native justice operates on a different paradigm than traditional European justice. European justice operates on the paradigm of sanctions, punishment, retribution. The traditional Native justice paradigm is based upon reparations and making people whole. So there are a handful of Native courts that are working, instead of throwing somebody who's strung out on meth, throwing him in prison, for 2 years, working with him to get some rehabilitation. But there's a uniquely Native spin on it because everybody has to sign the agreement, not just the offender. But what's new is they bring his family, his family, the people that he harmed, and certain elders, and everybody has to sign this agreement, and they are all equally responsible for keeping him off of the meth. Now that's different, so it's not just all on him. I think there is some ground to be gained in a more traditional justice system. Traditional policing, that's more complicated. But I think that, yes, we could change things up. So great question, thank you. I'll switch it off from side to side, yeah.
Hi, I'm Carol. I'm a freshman at CMC. I was really moved by what you were saying. I'm Native Hawaiian, so I think that a lot of what you're saying resounds also with the Hawaiian community. Yeah. But I was wondering, when you were growing up, kind of seeing the sort of issues that face the Indigenous community, did you ever really envision yourself where you are now, where you're in a really good position to sort of address those issues? And what sort of steps did you take in order to sort of get to where you are now?
Yeah, so when I grew up, the question was, I think everybody heard here, did I ever envision that I would be in a position to spark some degree of a national dialogue? No, I didn't. And, Native identity, especially in the US, I don't know much about your situation. I haven't been there yet. I'd love to go, honestly, when I was a kid, there were times that I didn't want to go to the res, and it shames me to say this, because there was nothing to do there. My reservation, there are exactly 3 restaurants. One of them is a Subway. We have no movie theaters, no rec centers, no bowling alleys. There's nothing to do on the reservation. And so there were times that I just wanted to stay in the city and, play with my friends or whatever. But my parents planted the seeds of taking me to our ceremonies and our culture, and I'm doing that now with my kids. They complain mightily when I take them to the reservation. And I've told David right now, David Jr., my oldest, like, okay, son, you want me to pay for Dartmouth? Okay, you're coming to the res this summer. Okay, that's the deal. Okay, you're gonna come to the Sundance, So it's complicated, and I did not envision that for myself. The steps that I took were what I talked about earlier. I believe in education for our people. And it is, believe it or not, a complicated topic, because there are some in my community that do not believe in education. They say that sending kids to colleges such as this amazing college, or Dartmouth, or University of Colorado, is not good for our students. They say that we're training them in the white man's ways. I disagree strongly. I say that we need knowledge, and the more that we can become knowledgeable and educated, the more that we will be in positions to become judges, politicians. First Native American woman just went into space last week. I believe, I'm a big believer in education, so I will leave it at that. Thank you for that question.
Thank you so much.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Emma. I'm a sophomore at Claremont McKenna College. My question is more on the legal side. So you mentioned Major Crimes Act, and I'm wondering what are some of the solutions that we can deal with the situation policy-wise? Do you think it's better if we abolish the act in general and then return the rights back to the tribal courts? Or do you think it's better if we fund the federal agency better and have more FBIs near the reservation?
Great question, and I wrote an article in the New York Times where I did talk about the Major Crimes Act and what I think should be done. If you're interested, go to my website, davidweiden.com, and go to other writings, and you can read my op-ed in the New York Times on this. But in a nutshell, yes, I would love to see the Major Crimes Act completely shelved, because I think it's a disaster. But there would have to be other laws passed to allow for the transition. So there would have to be funding given by the federal government to Native communities so that we can police our own people. So yes, if it was up to me, I would say get rid of the Major Crimes Act in total. Short of that, let's use a law called the Tribal Law and Order Act to better fund courts, justice systems, and tribal police. So that's a good stopgap. So great question.
Thank you so much.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Manuel. I'm a senior engineering major at Harvard-Med. So I first got introduced to kind of, I guess, the horrors of laws that you've been talking about on reservations through a book called The Roundhouse. I'm guessing you're familiar with it. And then I'd like to kind of continue the study by reading your book. Is there anything off the top of your head, any books or authors that you would recommend to further read
Yes,
into?
absolutely, and thank you for the kind shout out to The Roundhouse by Louise Erdrich. Louise is a friend of mine, and she's a wonderful, wonderful person, and The Roundhouse is really her masterpiece. She won the Pulitzer Prize for another book. Was it, I'm forgetting, was it The Sentence, or I don't know which one it was. Night Watchman. She won the Pulitzer Prize for Night Watchman, but I believe The Roundhouse is her masterpiece. So if you're interested in these issues, and you don't want to read my clumsy prose, okay, read Louise Erdrich's National Book Award winning novel, The Roundhouse. Fantastic. But here's another book. So I have another friend, his name is David Troyer. He doesn't teach too far from here. He's at USC. He's at the University of Southern California in the English department. And his book, The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, I believe is the best starting point for anybody who doesn't know about these issues but would like to learn about them in an interesting way. Look, a lot of textbooks are kind of dry and turgid and not interesting. I promise you, David Troyer's book, The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, it was nominated for the National Book Award in Nonfiction. It's engaging, and it will cover a lot of these issues in much more depth than I can. So that's a good one. Wonderful question.
Thank you.
All right.
Time that we have today, but thank you all for your questions, and thank you again for the amazing talk.
Thank you so much.